In a crowded city neighborhood, a young boy named Michael grew up under the weight of expectations he could barely carry. Only 8 years old, Michael had a delicate, beautiful face with soft features and gentle eyes that often drew attention. Sometimes, people would stop and stare. Even intoxicated men would mistake him for a girl, not realizing he was only a child. But it wasn't just his looks that set him apart. It was his love for makeup. Often, he would sneak into his mother's vanity, experimenting with her lipstick and brushes, his little hands deftly applying red lipstick with a precision that would surprise even a professional. Makeup was his solace, his escape from a world that demanded he'd be something he wasn't. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. demise, were far too busy to notice the emotional needs of their only child. Mr. demise was a stern disciplinarian who believed that academic excellence was the only path to success. He had been raised in a harsh environment himself, disciplined mercilessly by his own father, which he believed had molded him into the successful engineer he was today. To him, Michael was destined for the same path, and he only paid attention to his academic performance, determined that his son would surpass all his peers. The burden of his father's expectations weighed heavily on Michael. Every day, he was reminded that he had to outperform his classmates, whom his father deemed his enemies. As a young child, Michael received massive beatings from his father, who would bruise his face and body if he dared to fail his assignments or exams. The constant pressure and beatings turned school into a battlefield, where Michael fought not just to succeed, but to survive in a world where failure meant pain. Michael turned to the one thing that brought him comfort: makeup. Since his early years, whenever his father's beatings left scars on his face and body, Michael would rush to his mother's makeup kit, using foundation to cover the bruises, applying blush to give his cheeks some color, and topping it all off with his favorite red lipstick. He loved the way it made him feel: beautiful, powerful, in control of something, at least for a while. His mother, who had caught him with makeup once or twice, paid little attention. She was too busy with the multimillion naira business her husband had set up for her, a business she felt indebted to him for. She never challenged Mr. demise, never intervened, and simply hoped that Michael would outgrow what she saw as a childish phase. One day, as Mrs. demise chatted with her friend in the living room, Michael passed by, his face carefully painted with the bright red lipstick he loved. "Can't you see your son?" her friend asked, shocked. "Why is he wearing makeup?" Mrs. demise brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just a child's thing. He'll outgrow it. But you should stop it before it becomes something else," her friend warned. Mrs. demise sighed. "I have no real say when it comes to Michael. I was just a poor girl who married into the demise's wealthy family. I don't want anything that will turn my husband's anger toward me. Who am I to interfere?" "He'll be fine," she assured, trying to change the topic to business. And so, Michael continued to live his life in a quiet corner of his own. His father, Mr. demise, cared only for his son's grades, and Michael worked tirelessly to meet his father's standards, even though the fear of failure loomed large. The boy was not pampered, despite the family's wealth. He did chores, ran errands, and always tried to do more to gain some semblance of approval. The only place he found refuge was in his makeup, which his father knew nothing about. But Michael was being watched. Mr. Musa, a man who lived down the street, had been observing Michael for a while, mesmerized by his beautiful face. He would watch from his window as Michael walked by on his daily errands, biding his time. One weekend, while Michael's parents were home, Mr. demise sent him on another errand. Along the road, Michael lost the money he had been given. Panic set in, and he began to cry. Mr. Musa, who had been watching, saw his chance. He called Michael over, offered him a glass of milk to calm him down, milk he had secretly drugged. Mr. Musa asked Michael why he was crying, and Michael narrated it all to him, explaining how he was so scared to return home because of how mercilessly his father would handle him for losing the money. Mr. Musa quickly comforted Michael, promising to give him back the money he lost, but on one condition. As the drug began to work on Michael, weakening his muscles, Mr. Musa's countenance changed, revealing his true intent. He took advantage of Michael, bending him over and doing the unthinkable. What happened that day was too horrible for an 8-year-old to comprehend. When he was done, he handed Michael the money, as he had promised, telling him not to tell anyone of their little secret. Michael returned home, sobbing in the dark, unable to speak to his parents, who were not his friends, but distant figures who imposed their rules and expectations. He cried himself to sleep, and that marked the first abuse Michael had experienced in the course of his little life. The trauma of what happened that day compounded the pain already festering in his young heart. With no one to turn to, no one who would understand or even care, Michael's behavior grew erratic. At school, he became aggressive, lashing out at classmates, seeing in them the enemies his father had told him about. One day, in a fit of rage, he broke another student's head during a fight. He was expelled, labeled as a problem child. When the school reported the incident to his father, Mr. demise was furious. He scolded Michael harshly, vowing to teach him discipline the hard way. He decided to send Michael to his strict aunt in the village, a woman known for her rigid ways. Michael was to stay there until he was fixed, not allowed back until he had been disciplined properly. His aunt was cruel, and her daughters were no different. They mocked Michael, made him do all the farm work. He was the one selling their Gary at the market under the scorching sun each day, and sadly, they often forgot to leave food for Michael before he returned from the market each day, thereby forcing him to drink Gary every day and sleep hungry in the cassava barn. They called this discipline. One day, as Michael was returning home from the market, 3 male touts, smoking and loitering around an uncompleted building, called him over. "Why is your face so fine like this?" they taunted. What happened next was another unspeakable violation. They warned Michael not to scream or make any noise, threatening to kill him in the uncompleted building if he disobeyed. It turned out these men were gay, and they decided to abuse Michael all over again. While they took turns, one kept watch outside to make sure no one was coming. When they were done, they gave him some money, as if that would make up for what they had done. Tears streamed down Michael's cheeks as he used the money to buy food. He ate slowly, painfully, realizing it was the first time in years he had eaten so well. The pain and suffering became too much for Michael. One day, he took the money he had saved from the touts and fled the village, hoping to return home and end his suffering. But when he arrived, his father was furious to see him back. "You're not supposed to be here," Mr. demise shouted, his voice harsh. 2 years, no less. So, he told his son to return to the village and not show his face in the house until he completed his time there with his aunt. His mother, helpless, watched in silent agony, knowing she could do nothing to interfere. Her fear of her husband's wrath kept her silent. The next day, Michael pretended to be leaving back for the village, but instead, he ran away, this time, with nowhere to go. He began to sleep by the roadside, surviving on scraps. That was when Lady Lucy, a hairdresser who ran a small salon nearby, found him. She took pity on the young boy, offering him food and shelter. In return, Michael worked at her salon, sweeping, running errands, and eventually doing what he loved the most, makeup. But every night, in Lady Lucy's house, Michael noticed that she would always go out late, while he slept and returned the next day with a lot of money. He wondered where she always went. Soon, Lady Lucy began to stare at Michael, thinking to herself of how beautiful he looked and how she could benefit from it. She decided to condition him to follow her to the brothel where she worked at night, so he could work for her there, too. She would collect money from the big gay alhajis and offer Michael to them, telling him to do well before locking him in with the men. These men would abuse Michael repeatedly, devouring him from behind, while Lady Lucy took all the money, only paying Michael back with food. Soon, it became unbearable for Michael. He felt used, trapped, with no good clothes to wear, no life of his own. Knowing he was being exploited, he gathered the courage to begin taking money directly from the men. This threw Lady Lucy into a state of anger. She cried out, lamenting over Michael's betrayal after all she had done for him. And so, she threw him out of her house, hoping to cut him off from the men she had introduced him to. With nowhere to go, Michael ended up at another brothel. He begged the women there to let him stay, and they agreed, as long as he would bring in money for them. And so, this marked the beginning of Michael's new life as a prostitute in the brothel. Being surrounded by people who had also known suffering, Michael found some semblance of peace. He dreamed of saving enough money to open his own makeup store one day, a place where he could be himself without fear. He clung to that dream with all the hope left in his young heart, believing that someday he would leave the shadows of his past behind and step into a future where his talent, not his pain, defined him. Years passed, and Michael began to wear his identity openly for all to see. He grew up in the brothel and was fully identified as a woman. He would go with the girls and stand on the roadside, where drunk men would stop at night to patronize them. Because he was so beautiful, these drunk and intoxicated men would pick him up, thinking he was a woman. When they got to the hotel room, Michael would give the straight men a condition. They should go straight to the point and enter him from behind. He would not allow them to touch him or do any form of foreplay in order to prevent them from finding out he was not truly a woman. And if anyone refused, he would walk out on them and return their money. Because these men were drunk, they rarely noticed the truth. They were being deceived and that they were not actually with a woman. They would always do his bidding. One day, while Michael was walking with his mates on the street, they came across a poor, old woman begging by the roadside. While the others paid her no attention, Michael felt a pang of pity for the woman. He returned later that day to give her some money, and this became a regular habit. Over time, they became friends. Michael took the helpless old grandmother to a building still under construction, where she could find shelter. He would bring her food and feed her day after day. The old woman was so grateful. She felt like she had found a son in Michael. Normally, people would laugh at Michael whenever he walked by because of his appearance, but to the old woman, he was a savior. Though most people thought the worst of him and assumed he was useless, Michael had a pure heart despite his suffering. Whenever he visited, the grandmother would sit him down and read the Bible to him, preaching about God and the importance of constant fellowship with him, no matter how difficult life became. Her words touched Michael deeply, breaking him down, for he had never been taught about God or experienced the love of God in his life. All Michael had known was rejection. He struggled between the thought of giving his life to God or letting go of his only source of income. Soon, it was time for the grandmother to leave and return to her village, where she planned to wait for death. She had suffered all her life and was now ready to go to God. She hugged Michael tightly, begging him to do her just one favor, to give his life to God, no matter what. Michael cried uncontrollably, knowing his only true friend was leaving for good. He made her a promise as he watched her leave, never to return again. Before she left, she placed a Bible on the floor for Michael, challenging him to pick it up the day he decided to give his life to God. She told him the Bible would be waiting for him, and that she would die a happy woman if he did. With teary eyes, Michael stared at the Bible on the floor. He found himself at a crossroads, faced with a decision to discover God or continue with his old ways. That day, as he returned home, Michael could not stop thinking. All night, his mind was restless. Finally, he decided he would go back, pick up the Bible, and turn a new leaf. But just before he could act on this decision, he received a call from one of his brothel sisters, who later came to tell him about a mega-millionaire Alhaji she had met. She explained that she had told the Alhaji she was coming with him, and they were to be his clients that night. Michael told her he was done with that life and planned to leave the next day. However, she cajoled him into joining her for the night, promising him a huge payout and assuring him that he would never have to return to that life again. Reluctantly, Michael agreed to go with her to meet the client for what he hoped would be the last time. As the girls rendered their services to the wealthy Alhaji, he was very pleased that night. When morning came, Michael returned home with a large sum of money he had been paid, but his friend did not come back with him. Unknown to Michael, she had stolen from the Alhaji and fled with his millions. When the Alhaji discovered the theft, he was furious. He decided to set a trap, calling for both the girl and Michael to meet him by the roadside the next day at night. Michael tried reaching out to his friend, whose number was no longer reachable, as the Alhaji had complained. Left with no choice, Michael innocently decided to meet up with the Alhaji that night. But instead of the Alhaji, 4 hefty men approached him with forceful strides. Their leader immediately began accusing Michael of stealing from their boss. Michael tried to explain, pleading, "I know nothing of any theft," but the leader ignored him, ordering his men to beat him up. As they assaulted Michael, his secret was revealed. The men discovered he was wearing a fake foam bra and realized he was actually a man. Their leader's anger intensified. In their society, being gay was something despised and met with hostility. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the dusty streets where Michael lay. His body, beaten and broken, was sprawled lifeless on the ground. His once beautiful face was now bruised and battered beyond recognition, blood pooling beneath him. A stark contrast to the colorful makeup he had once loved to wear. His eyes, now closed forever, held the faintest hint of tears, as if, in his final moments, he had glimpsed a promise he would never get to fulfill. The day before, Michael had been filled with hope for the first time. He had considered the possibility of a different path, a life where he could finally be free of the chains that had bound him for so long. He had stared at the Bible the old woman had left behind, its cover worn and pages yellowed, yet it seemed to glow with the promise of something new. He was torn between the allure of quick money from his dangerous life and the peace he felt in the presence of the grandmother who had become like family to him, the only one who had ever truly seen him for who he was. Michael's heart had been heavy as he tossed and turned on his bed, thinking of the grandmother's words, "Give your life to God, no matter what." Her voice echoed in his mind, soft yet firm, a plea wrapped in love. She had hugged him so tightly before leaving, her frail arms conveying a strength he had never felt from anyone else. He had promised her he would try, and he intended to keep that promise. He had resolved to pick up that Bible and start anew, to choose a different life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. His sister's unexpected visit had been a test of his will. She had lured him back into his old ways just for one last night. He needed the money, she insisted, to finally escape the life that had trapped him for so long. Michael hesitated, torn between the promise he made and the desperate pull of what felt like his only option. Just one last time, he told himself, then I'll be free. But on the night of his last escapade, everything went wrong. He was met not with mercy, but with brutality. The men had descended upon him, fists raining down like thunder, their words like knives. They discovered his secret, and their anger turned into a blinding rage. To them, he was not just a thief, but a disgrace, an abomination in their eyes. His very existence was an affront to their beliefs and values. Their fury was fueled by ignorance and hatred, and they beat him without restraint, without mercy. Michael had cried out, trying to explain, trying to plead for his life, but his voice was lost in the blows that kept coming, in the darkness that swallowed him whole. He had planned to pick up the Bible that day. He had planned to start a new life, but life had not given him the chance. Michael lay there, his body cold under the dim glow of the streetlights. The world around him continued on, unaware that it had lost a boy with a pure heart, a boy who had been dealt the cruelest of hands yet still found the strength to care for others, even when no one cared for him. His dreams, his hopes, his promise to the only friend he had ever known, all were silenced in that moment. At the hospital, Michael's father lay on his sick bed, his face a mask of regret. His health had been failing for months, his strength sapped by a mysterious illness that no doctor could cure. As he lay there, he thought of his son, the boy he had cast away in his pursuit of perfection. His heart ached with a longing he had never known, a desire to hold Michael, to tell him he was sorry, that he wished he had been a better father. But now it was too late. Michael's mother sat by his bedside, her hands trembling as she thought about her mistakes. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "We will find him. He will come back to us." But in her heart, she felt a deep, unspeakable dread. She had been complicit in her silence, in her failure to protect her child from the man she loved. And now, she, too, would have to live with the knowledge that they had both failed the one person they were supposed to love unconditionally. They did not know that their son was gone, that he would never return to them, never step through their door again. The Bible the old woman had left lay in the construction site, untouched, waiting for a boy who would never come back. A gust of wind blew through, rustling its pages as if it, too, mourned the loss of a soul that had never been given the chance to live. In the village, the old woman sat by her window, looking out at the horizon, waiting for news of Michael. She knew her time was short, but she clung to the hope that he would find his way to God. She whispered softly, "God, take care of my boy." She did not know that he had already left this world, his life taken too soon, his dreams crushed under the weight of a world that had never understood him. There is an old saying, "A child is a seed. Nurture it with love, and it will bloom. Neglect it, and it will wither and die." Michael was that seed, a beautiful soul who had the potential to blossom, to bring color to a world that so desperately needed it. But instead, he was left to wither, his light snuffed out by those who should have protected and loved him. Michael's story is a cautionary tale for every parent, every guardian, every person who has the power to shape a young life. It is a reminder that love and understanding are more powerful than any amount of discipline or strictness. A reminder that children are not meant to be molded into our own image, but rather to be loved for who they are, to be given the freedom to discover their own path. Michael did not die because he was weak or because he was lost. He died because the world failed him, because the people who should have loved him most, who should have nurtured his unique gifts, turned their backs when he needed them the most. May his story be a lesson, a call to action, to every parent and guardian. For a child is like clay. It takes the shape of the hands that mold it. Let those hands be kind. Let them be gentle. Let them be filled with love. For in the end, it is not the child who fails. It is the world that fails the child. And so, Michael's name fades into the quiet of the night. A name that should have been remembered for his gifts, his kindness, his beauty. Instead, it is remembered for a life cut short, a promise unfulfilled. The wind carries his story, hoping it reaches the ears of those who still have a chance to make a difference, to save another Michael from the same fate. The Bible left in the dirt waits for another hand to pick it up, a hand that might find in its pages the peace that Michael never could.